will go into some of the stories that just really you can't just put out anywhere publicly. And this is one such story, and we're going to be going into this from a different angle than what most might anticipate. It's about an 11-year-old girl who was suspected of shoplifting at a Kroger store supermarket that was tased by a law enforcement officer. The girl, from what we understand in the early reports here, would not stop when the officer ordered her to stop, so instead the officer tased the child and then arrested her for shoplifting. Her mother is not happy about the incident, and rightfully so. It says here the girl, who was not immediately identified, was approached by a Cincinnati police officer, Kevin Brown, at a Kroger after he suspected her of using a backpack to shoplift. Cincinnati police said Brown approached her, but she tried to flee and was shocked when the stun gun the girl was taken to a hospital following the incident. The girl was charged with theft and obstruction of justice, but Cincinnati Mayor John Cranley asked the prosecutor to drop the charges. I can't say as you blaming, you know, but let me first play what her mother says about this. I think it's very important we hear about this. Then we're going to take this home. We're going to take it very seriously home, all the way back to where law enforcement is training with Israeli law enforcement in Israel. Listen to this here.
To think before they do action. Now, I do want justice. I'm going for it. Because I don't want nothing else to happen. I don't want it to happen to nobody else's kids. Because it could have been worse. It could have been a gun. It didn't have nothing on her but a bag for the goodies. That right there, that was wrong. That was so wrong. And then she was afraid. She was scared. Her body still hurt from that. Said at night when she go to sleep, she still feels shivers. Still wrong. Should no kid be tased at all? If you can't run, then you need to get off the police force. If you can't handle an 11-year-old child, then you really need to get off the police force.
I can't say as I agree with her anymore. I agree 100% with this lady here. And the thing is what's troubling to me, this is exactly what's going on and could be a result of the fact that we have been training with Israeli forces. Now, I do respect the fact that Israel has to have their own type of police forcing in order to protect Israeli citizens. We do have terror attacks in the country. We do have the Intifada that has been going on. But then again, there's two sides to that story as well. I know I lived in Israel. I survived in 2004 a terrorist bombing in the Second Intifada on September 22nd up near French Hill, close to where I lived at. An 18-year-old girl that took her own life to try to kill as many as she could. In fact, I was knocked down right onto the ground from the blast itself. So I know what it's like. But yet at the same time, we're also causing tremendous amount of problems, and there's a lot of cover-up that goes on in Israel as well. And Israel is training our police, not only our police, but they're sending their Mossad agents here to train FEMA. FEMA to do what? Well, when they get ready probably to disarm this nation, what they will do is separate you, just as it was in the days of the Holocaust, what our forefathers had to go through as well. I know so because I have family members on my mother and father's side, thousands that died in the Holocaust or were prisoners in the Holocaust. I have a huge long list of Yad Vashem victims that were there. But what's sad is when I'm seeing my own countrymen begin to treat others the way we were treated. When Moses clearly said, do not oppress your neighbor that is among you, because we were oppressed as well. And we should remember this. I realize there's a need for security, but sometimes I think we carry it a bit too far. Now, let me just share with you why I'm saying this. You have to understand, I believe 100% that the nation of Israel has been hijacked by a Jesuit regime that is neo-Nazi to the core. It's not the true Israeli people. The true Israeli people want peace. They want to have a relationship that is neutral in a democratic society in Israel. You're not being told this, though. We're not being told here in America the real truth of what goes on inside of Israel. In fact, we're being lied to on a regular basis so that the narrative of what the Jesuit conspiracy is can continue forward. And we should wake up as a Christian community, because after all, Bibi Netanyahu, who I used to love and adore, has brought the gay pride parades into the city of Jerusalem. He has endorsed it. He has also given greater open laws for the Israeli government to participate in the abortions against the unborn children, taking those lives there, fully complicit with this huge movement that is going on in the secular world. Very troubling to me. After all, the biblical narrative of the two witnesses of Revelation 11 says that that great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, because we allowed Esau's descendants to run the country and because we have turned it into a sodomite nation. Very troubling indeed. Now, let's get right into this from a biblical aspect real quick, and then I'm going to start sharing with you from an Israeli perspective. And there are literally hundreds and thousands of voices in Israel that are trying to cry out, but so few are ever heard. And we need to really get serious about this, friends, because those of us that do love Israel, we have got to recognize there has been an infiltration in the government. There's an infiltration in the country there to run our nation right into the ground and to take away the true light that Israel is to be to the entire world, and instead to bring about a Jesuit light. And we've got to confront this head on. Scripture says here in 1 Peter right here, going back up to verse 14, if you be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye, for the Spirit of glory and the God resteth upon you. On their part he is evil spoken of, but on your part he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf. For the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God, and it first began at us. What shall the end of them that obey not the gospel of God? And if righteousness scarcely be saved, where shall the ungodly and the sinner appear? So we must judge at our own home first. I am a Jew by birth. I am a house of Israel as well as the house of Judah. My mother from the house of Judah, my father from the house of Israel. And so therefore, I can stand with my people and say that there are unjust things happening in the homeland today. Things that are very, very troubling to me. And so we must begin that judgment at home. And that's what I'm here to do, is to try to wake up my Christian friends to recognize the things that are going on that are not of God. I want to introduce to you Gideon Levy, very much like Barry Chamish, very much like the late Joel Boehnerman, of course the late Barry Chamish as well. A remarkable journalist in Israel. He is an Israeli, born in Israel, and Gideon Levy, clearly you'll tell by Israeli accent there, his English is not the best in the world. We're going to play a couple of clips here, but we're talking about the children, and we're talking about what happened to this 11-year-old girl that was tased. And in fact, recently, because of my time in the intelligence community, which we are speaking about around the world, and if you're watching this today, just to let you know, a reminder, I will be speaking as well as my wife in Nashville, Tennessee, actually Lebanon, Tennessee, chpcenter.com. I'll try to put that in the description here below for you so you can check on that 14th and 15th of September. And I will be speaking of my time in the intelligence community. It will shock you. I worked with the CIA for 6 years with an assassin, no less, was my own partner, although that was not my job. And I actually never got to, not that I would want to witness any of the assassinations, but very much know and have knowledge of the things, the people that were being silenced. As many as 8 people were silenced to cover up a major money laundering operation by big power companies. The conspiracy goes all the way up to the White House in 1990, the President of the United States stopping the investigation to keep anyone from finding out what was really going on. Well, we know the answers to those things there, and I have been speaking with investigators already, so I will tell you that. I have been speaking to investigators about the case. One of the cases may be reopened. They're examining the evidence over again now, and they are taking this very, very seriously. And in the process of speaking to those investigators, one particular law enforcement officer said to me that, yes, very much aware of the exchange with Israel and the United States, and it was troubling him, and yet he was a Jewish law enforcement officer, but he was troubled by it. He said, because once we begin to take the training away from America, he said, we're using policies that may not apply to our circumstances. And although I appreciate Israel's training for what they do to protect Israeli citizens, I also believe that we have situations that are clearly in violation of human rights of other children, and it happens oftentimes because these other children are put on a lower class level. I want to introduce to you Gideon Levy. He writes for the newspaper Haaretz. He's a columnist, an incredible journalist. He's a spokesman around the world, and he wants to see genuine change in Israel as well, because he, like myself, he loves the Israeli people, he loves our country, but he knows that we need to have some kind of change there. I'm going to play a couple of different parts. We're going to get to the part about children in just a few moments, but I actually had it started at around 6:50 mark in this particular part of the interview. I want you to listen closely because I think it'll be a blessing to you. Please listen.
Will they supply? And I can tell you, in the United States, as an Israeli, we don't have a bigger enemy than the Jewish lobby. We don't have a bigger enemy for justice, for peace, for equality, than those who think that if you supply the drug addicted with more drugs, you are his friend. That if you support him blindly and automatically, whatever he does, you are a friend. No, my friends, those are not friends, those are enemies. And I can't tell you how happy and proud I am to be here today and not there tomorrow.
Now, he's not talking about not being in Israel. It was a different meeting he's talking about.
The title of my lecture speaks about Zionism. And Zionism is one of the two religions of Israel. And as
we'll have to go into that part later on a different broadcast, but he was actually talking about this issue here because of the Jewish lobby that was coming to America that would be lobbying the U.S. for more weapons, more drugs, and things of that nature there. This is why he was speaking about this. And he tells you that you have to know what's really going on in Israel to understand those things that are happening. I'm going to play for you a part in here that he speaks about this. So we're going to move forward into this video, and by the way, I'll have the link to the video in the description for you. You can watch this for yourself. So when I tell you the minute mark, the first one was at 6 minutes 50 seconds. It just identifies that Gideon Levy is a Israeli born, and in his thoughts on the matters that are going on in Israel and how you can help Israel. It's a very important particular broadcast. We're going to jump all the way to 13 minutes and 45 seconds into the video at this point now, because this is where he talks about 3 cases of children that have been in the crosshairs of the Israeli military. And I am, of course, very aware of 2 of these, and I do want to discuss this. Okay, I want to discuss this with you. You know what? Before I do that, let me back up. I apologize. Wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. That's a different issue. I'll go into that later. Okay, so he's going to mention pretty rapidly in a row. He's also going to mention Ahed Tamimi, which is the young girl that was arrested, put in prison, in Israeli prison there, and served 8 months in prison there for slapping a police officer. Many times we are thinking that, well, she deserved it. She smacked a cop around and she deserved, an Israeli soldier that is, she deserved to go to prison. But as I said to you, many times we don't know what was behind the issue. Well, it just so happens that Gideon Levy knew what was behind the issue and actually met with a victim, which was her cousin, that only moments before this incident had been shot in the head. Please listen, and please listen closely.
On a daily basis, but really daily basis, the media hardly covers them, and if they cover them, it will be always according to the Zionistic narrative. A terrorist of 12, a girl of 14 with scissors in her hands as an existential threat to the state of Israel,
He's giving you...
A girl who is slapping a soldier.
I want to play this again. He's giving you titles that have been used in news reports. All right? Let me just back it up. I want you to hear this again because it's very important that you understand the narrative. This is what he's talking about. The narrative that's being portrayed to the public. And so you have to understand, even amongst Israelis that are very supportive of the government, we don't, in many cases, Israelis don't even know for themselves either. We really believe that what's happening in Israel and what we're seeing in the news media when these outrageous these titles in the media, that this is really what's happening. All right, listen to what he says so you understand. He's giving you those titles in news articles.
A terrorist of 12.
Okay, a terrorist of 12. 12-year-old terrorist. All right, listen to the next one.
A girl of 14 with scissors in her hands as an existential threat to the state of Israel.
So the girl, 14-year-old girl with scissors in her hand, is an existential threat to the state of Israel. And when we bring this one up, many of you will remember, I actually did the analysis on this video and was very troubled by what I saw. I was very strong standing with Israel's right to defend itself. As a victim of a suicide bombing myself, to know that Israel is under this threat. And I also know, like I said, two sides are to this, friends. You know, I know that the Vatican is clearly inciting the violence on the Palestinian side against the Jews. But in some cases, it's already because the violence has been done to the Palestinian as well. So it goes back and forth both ways. All right, but listen on.
A girl who is slapping a soldier as someone who deserves life sentence, not less than this.
So the girl that was slapping the soldier, one of the article titles was, she deserves a life sentence, nothing less than this. A life sentence. Listen more.
A girl that 1 hour before her cousin was shot in his head 50 meters away from her home. So now the Israeli army claims that this was fabricated. I mean, even the Israeli propaganda lost its shame. But Israel dares to claim that this child, Ahed Tamimi, whom I met a few days after he was injured, he lost half of his brain, that he fabricated his injury, then you see that Israel is really desperate.
Okay, as he said, he met with Ahed Tamimi. Ahed, by the way, is the little boy that's 15 years old that was shot in the head by the Israeli military. 50 meters from Ahed Tamimi, the names are very similar. The young lady that slapped the soldier, very close to where she lived at. I want to share with you, we're going to come right back. Going to come back to Gideon Levy, an Israeli, Jewish Israeli citizen. Okay? I want to show something to you so you can see this. All right? Now this is, of course, so you guys will remember, this is Ahed Tamimi. She's the young girl that was slapping the police officer or the soldier around that went viral on the internet. I'm just trying to see if I've got a video of that in this article. I don't know if they placed it in. No, they didn't place it in here. But those of you that will remember her by seeing her face here, Ahed Tamimi was the young girl that slapped the soldier repeatedly in the face while it was being filmed. But you have to understand, just with no more than 1 hour before this happened, her cousin, Ahed Tamimi, this young boy right here, that you can see on the image here, was shot by Israeli forces. Now, Gideon, who dared to challenge the Israeli government's narrative, Gideon, the very man, the one you're just listening to now, the Israeli himself, Jewish Israeli man that is sitting there challenging the narrative, he met with the family of this little boy. And as you can see, his whole side of his skull here drops in. Was shot in the head by Israeli soldiers. They say that they have fabricated the story and that the girl slapping the soldier around was just doing it just for, who knows, publicity or whatever. And they made the parents of this child here sign that he fell off his bicycle. Now, do you really think that falling off your bicycle is going to cause your skull to collapse in? Now, you have to understand, this photograph here is done after the healing process, after the surgery that he had. You know, of course, they had to operate on him to save his life. Part of his brain was blown out. Very, very difficult story right here. It says, just before Palestinian teen Ahed Tamimi slapped one of the soldiers would invade her yard, she learned that her 15-year-old cousin Muhammad had been shot in the head at close range. All right? So the left side of his face is twisted, swollen, fragmented, scarred. They congealed blood by his nose stitches in his face. One eye is shut and seam-line stitches across the whole scalp. A boy's face turned scar face. Some of his skull bones were removed in surgery and won't be returned until they're placed for another 6 months. All right? So this is what happened. And this young girl here, we wonder why she is slapping the soldier around. You know, there should have nothing happened to this girl. But they covered it up anyway. Now this is why Gideon Levy, anybody know the name Levy, you know the guy comes from a Jewish family. Gideon Levy, he's talking about this and he's saying that, well, let's listen to it again. Let's just back it up just a little bit here and listen to what he says here.
That this child, Muhammad Tamimi, whom I met a few days after he was injured, he lost half of his brain, that he fabricated his injury, then you see that Israel is really desperate. If Israel needs this kind of level of propaganda, if Israel is getting so low in denying shooting in the head of a child of 15 and claiming that he fell from the bicycles, then do you know that things are getting worse. Maybe it's a hope for a new beginning. But right now, look how low does it get there. And all those are passing Israeli society as if nothing is happening. No question marks, very little moral doubts, if at all. A cover-up, living in denial like never before. I cannot think about one society which lives in such denial like the Israeli society. And again, it includes left and right, except of the very devoted extreme left activists. Let's remember them. But they are really small in figures and totally delegitimized. So when I speak about left, I mean Labour, Yesh Atid, the new promise of Israeli politics, and maybe the next Prime Minister, Yair Lapid, and all the rest. In many ways, they are worse than the right-wingers. Because they feel so good about themselves. Because they are so sure that they are so human and universal and moral.
Keep that in mind.
While the right-wingers at least don't cover up. They say, yes, we are fascists. So what's wrong about it? We are Jews and we have the right to be fascists. Because we are the chosen people, we have the right and nobody's going to tell us what to do. When it comes to the central left, as it's called, I can hardly pronounce it, central left, what do those people have to do with left?
All right, now I want to bring up this point as well because Mr. Livy here, Gideon Livy, is actually stating that the left is worse than the right. Of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu being on the far right of the equation here, the Likud party. Naftali Bennett also would probably be considered a right-wing religious group there. But then we have people like Tzipi Livni, who is a left side. And, you know, this is where it gets interesting because I actually pulled up as well from her an interview that she was doing, and very strange situation with Tzipi Livni. This is an interview back with RT. I've talked about this interview extensively on Israeli News Live, but I never actually got to play the clip because at the time I couldn't find the clip for you guys. I took the time to find it this time. Now, I will tell you something. I'm going to play a couple of different excerpts from this because it's going to show you just how sinister the left can really be in Israel. Because Tzipi Livni, as you will know, she was the one during Obama's administration that was pushing for a two-state solution in Israel. Now, the two-state solution's already been signed. It's all done and gone, and we know this from our Israeli friend Saman Tov, who spoke about this. We know this from journalists such as the late Barry Chamish and Joe Bainerman, the late Joe Bainerman there, and the 1993 Oslo Accords there, where the agreement was made with Yasser Arafat, Pope John Paul II, and of course Shimon Peres at that time. But oddly enough, I'm backing this up to 8 minutes and 59 seconds into this interview. Now this is a little off. It's not directly what I'm wanting you to hear about, but I thought this was really interesting. When the commentator for RT actually speaks about the terrorism and Saudi Arabia's involvement as a known involvement into terrorism in the Middle East there in Syria, it just so happens it falls on the 9-minute and 11-second mark. Reminds me of 9/11. In reality, it was Saudi Arabia, of course, with Israel, that was involved in this attack on the World Trade Center there. But listen to what she says here, because I need to build a platform of the way that Tzipi Livni goes, because it does show the dark side of the left. Listen to this.
Geopolitical sponsors of the so-called Syrian opposition were becoming increasingly more accommodating. And by that I mean, first and foremost, Saudi Arabia, which also, we all know, supports terrorist organizations.
Now see, when she said Saudi Arabia and they support terrorists, as soon as the word terrorist came out of her mouth, it was on 9/11. That is pretty weird. But anyway, the argument is being made here over Iran, and this is what this is all about here on Worlds Apart on RT. They're talking about Iran and why Israel has not been more actively involved, seeing as they seem to be against Iran so much, but yet instead, as we know, there's been too much activity in trying to protect the terrorists that are working in the country. But listen to a little bit more here.
Wouldn't it be fair to say that in Syria, Israel found itself on the losing side, and now you are trying to get your way through diplomatic means, which is fair, but that doesn't mean that you should get all that you are asking for.
No, not at all. I would not accept it. Israel, since day one, decided not to involve in the situation in Syria. We are just trying to help those wounded people that are trying to come here.
Well, many of them were wounded fighters and wounded jihadists.
We are helping those that need help, and they're coming to Israeli border and give them and help them in Israeli hospital. This is humanitarian stuff. But Israel is not involved in the situation in Syria, and rightly so. But we do hope that the end game, or what would happen in the end, would not affect Israel's security. And there is no position in Israel on this. And therefore, since I believe in international diplomacy, I believe that this is something that it is very legitimate from the Israeli side to put our concerns on the table and to have a better understanding that our concerns should be, and are, I believe, the concerns of others in the region as well.
Now, it's kind of interesting. If you'll notice, though, she mentions about how that Israel is doing strictly the humanitarian aid to those that are coming to the border. But as the RT journalist points out, it is the jihadists, it is the terrorists that are fighting in the country that Israel is actually helping with the medical aid, correct? Now, I made this case long ago, though, because when it comes to the Syrian soldiers, Livni could care less about them. Let's listen to what Livni has to say when he gets to that point right there in the broadcast.
If you take Iran out of the equation, who can take on that jihadi force? Because I don't think it would be fully fair to refer to Iran, the state of Iran, as a terrorist organization. That's a political interpretation of Israel. But if you take the Iranian-Israel out of the equation altogether, who will be there to confront the jihadi force?
All of us need to confront the jihadi, all the terrorist organizations, as I said before. For me, whether it comes from Sunni ideology or Shia ideology, it is less important. And therefore, all of us, the international community, should confront those. And we have
here it comes.
That support terrorist organizations like Iran and Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, and terrorist organizations themselves. And we need.
Now, there's no mention of Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra. None of those are mentioned as terrorist organizations. She's only pointing out to the ones that the Iranian forces have supported in the past, which is Hezbollah and Hamas. Now, Hamas truly is a bad dude, and so Hezbollah as well. I agree with this. But the only ones that have been helping the Syrian people to defeat the terrorists that have been sponsored by the Saudi government, the U.S. government, and Turkey, it has been, of course, the Iranian forces. That's one reason why RT is saying you can't label them as a terrorist force. They've been fighting the terrorists that have been trying to overthrow the nation. All right, but then she brings up this other issue here, and it's going to be about, then if you're worried about Iran, why didn't Israel come to Syria's aid to help defeat these terrorists in the beginning? This is when you find out that Israel is not there for the humanitarian reasons. Listen to this.
To act against them, and I believe that we need to act against them forcefully, and this is something that the international community should do. And therefore, you would not find me supporting in any way or you know, living with the situation of what Daesh is doing against all of us, because they would not compromise on our existence.
But how then would you explain the Israel's position of neutrality in the Syrian conflict? If you're so willing to confront terrorist organizations, why didn't Israel jump on board, joined Russia in Syria, and help exterminate the jihadi force there? Then the Iranian influence perhaps would have been somewhat curtailed.
I hope that you would not suggest that Israel would send our soldiers to fight in Syria as well. It would not happen, hopefully. And I hope that this is not your suggestion.
But how then? I mean...
Now see, isn't that something? That is clearly a two-faced opinion. That is not neutrality. Because Syria did need Israel's help. And we should have, as Israeli citizens, stood with Syria in a time when jihadists were coming against this nation. Because Israel's mothers, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and what is it? Not Huldah, but I forget the other mother, the other maiden that was well, that are the mothers of Israel, that birthed the 12 tribes of Israel, were all Syrians to begin with. Damascus is where the Christian community, the oldest Christian community in the world, from the house of Israel, Ephraim's own descendants, are still, the children of those descendants are there to this day. But no. God knew what side we would take. And this is where the shame comes in against us. Now, let's go back. I wanted to get that in there because, as we see here, Gideon Levy actually spoke about those very issues there, about where we are involved in supporting the left as well is just as bad as the right. In fact, he actually says the left is worse than the right, because I would have never expected something like this out of Tzipi Livni. And why? Because she was so passionate about a two-state solution. And yet with Netanyahu, he's clearly against a two-state solution. It was easier to define the way Netanyahu believed than it was the left, because Livni clearly seemed to be for the Palestinian people. But when it comes right down to it, it's the hidden agenda. It's the agenda that you don't know about, and that's the danger. That's the side that's working with Rome. Maybe even more so than Netanyahu himself. Also, though, as we mentioned earlier, Gideon also mentioned about the 14-year-old girl that was actually in Israel that was stabbed. Let me pull that up. Israel closes the case against the cop who shot the two scissors-wielding Palestinian teen attackers, and they say they did it for lack of evidence. This was the case that we actually reported ourselves, that after examining the video footage itself that's right here, you could clearly see that the officer, although I don't say that he should have been tried for murder, it was no doubt the act of passion, but he takes and kills the 14-year-old girl after she's already been subdued. Watch the video footage again. Now, the girls have scissors, and she's not hit nobody, but she's acting like she's going to do it. Now, let me stop this again. We've brought this out many, many times before. Okay, backing this up just a little bit. Now, watch all. Now, this girl here, she's over here. Now, this man here is the security officer. You can see the gun right there, kind of like the grassy knoll with the situation with, oh gosh, what is that? I forget the Kennedy assassination. But the girl here is going to go down from the chair. I have to back it up a little bit further. There she is there. She's got a pair of scissors as well. He's actually shooting at her first. All right? Now, the first time she's wounded, this girl here also has a pair of scissors. This one is 14 years old. This one is 16 years old. All right? Now, I realize they got scissors. All right? They're trying to commit terrorism. The only guy they stabbed was a Palestinian, an older Palestinian man was actually stabbed. Never was it a Jewish guy stabbed or anything, but he was. He is a security police there. All right, now watch what happens. Now, she's hit right there. You see her double over. And when the guy hits her with the chair, all right, she goes down anyway. Now he focuses on the other girl. All right? He goes there, he is pumping several rounds into her, but then he goes back to the first girl. Already down, and he shoots her again. The child may have survived the shot. The 16-year-old did survive, but the other girl did not. And as Gideon points out, they make it look like that it was the worst person on the face of the earth. Now, I realize what they're doing was completely wrong. I agree with that. I understand that. But we've seen the situation before where just with a chair, kid with the scissors, you can take down the kid with the scissors, no problem with the chair. And the guy that came to her, and she was shot and she was starting to go down, the guy hit her with a chair and took her down the rest of the way. You know, and so to me, it was excessive force to go and shoot her again. I just could not agree with that. And this is what Gideon Levy has brought out. The same with Ahed Tamimi. She gets 8 months in jail for slapping around a cop that, an Israeli soldier that just moments ago, her cousin, his brain was blown half off of his head. As I said, we don't know the full story of what really goes on. So I'm going to play again. I want you to hear again with what Gideon Levy says, and we'll close on this broadcast here. But just in closing, I want you to be able to hear this for yourself once again, what Mr. Livni said about this situation here, because it's worth mentioning a second time here so that you guys can hear this for yourself.
And the crimes are on a daily basis, but really daily basis. The media hardly covers them, and if they cover them, it will be always according to the Zionistic narrative. A terrorist of 12, a girl of 14 with scissors in her hands as an existential threat to the state of Israel, a girl who is slapping a soldier as someone who deserves life sentence, not less than this, a girl that 1 hour before her cousin was shot in his head 50 meters away from her home. So now the Israeli army claims that this was fabricated. I mean, even the Israeli propaganda lost its shame. But Israel dares to claim that this child, Muhammad Tamimi, whom I met a few days after he was injured, he lost half of his brain, that he fabricated his injury, then you see that Israel is really desperate. If Israel needs this kind of level of propaganda, if Israel is getting so low in denying shooting in the head of a child of 15 and claiming that he fell from the bicycles, then you know that things are getting worse. Maybe it's a hope for a new beginning. But right now, look how low does it get there.
This is what we have to deal with, friends. We have a coming of a Mashiach. The Messiah is truly coming. And yet, instead of trying to help our brothers and sisters in Israel, so many of us have been guilty in covering up the crimes that are being committed. We're not helping our people by covering up these things. If anything, it takes confession. What do you think that Christ, the whole Christian principle, is based on confessing the things that we have done wrong in life in order for God to forgive us? But you know, the thing is that I see as well, it's the Spirit. It is a spiritual application that I see, because the stage is being reset as it was 2,000 years ago. It's being reset again today. And what stage am I talking about? Well, 2,000 years ago, we rejected Yeshua as the Messiah. As a Jewish people, my forefathers rejected him. And we covered up everything. We lied about him. We sent false witnesses there about him. So what do you expect today then? As we've seen, Rome was in control of Israel 2,000 years ago. So Rome is in control again. We had a Sanhedrin council that was in control of Israel 2,000 years ago. We have a Sanhedrin council again today. We had judges and all types that were taking bribes. They were bribing the military back in those days, as they bribed the military that was guarding the tomb of Yeshua to say his body was stolen away. The same lies and deception of 2,000 years ago are here again today. The difference is this time we're going to have another remnant that will recognize that we have done wrong, that will recognize that indeed when we say, where did you get these wounds? And he says, in the house of my friends. And we will separate each one to our own families, and we will weep and mourn for days as a family that had lost their only son. It's not going to be that we will be lifted up on some pedestal before the world and say, this is Israel, the holiest city in the world. We will be a city that is weeping, and not only for the very wounds that we did to Yeshua 2,000 years ago, but the same wounds that we are inflicting upon the innocent people that are around us. The same lies, the same ungodliness that we were doing 2,000 years ago, we see again today. If you ever wanted to pray for Israel, this is the time. Pray for Israel that her eyes will come open. Pray that the Jewish people will begin to realize that we have to recognize that what we are doing is wrong. Pray too for these Palestinians, that God will do something with their heart that will cause them not to incite violence. But in many cases, they're inciting violence because of what they're living under. And I'm telling you, friends, I'm seeing it over and over and over. And we've got to recognize this is a prophetic stage that's being set up. The same things that happened 2,000 years ago are happening right before our eyes. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live here on Patreon. It took many times to get this video to come out the right way. I trust it's a blessing to you. Thank you for those of you that are joining here on Patreon and supporting this ministry. Believe me, without your support, we cannot do this. And we thank you for your support and helping us here on Patreon to get the message to the world. Shalom.